No one expected the room to go quiet. Not because of respect, not because of fear, but because of what had just been said. The statement didn't come from social media. It didn't come from a comment section. It came from a man in uniform, sitting comfortably behind a microphone, speaking with confidence, almost amusement. He leaned forward slightly and said it casually, as if stating a fact that needed no proof. Filipinos cannot fight. Some people laughed. Others nodded. A few exchanged knowing looks, as if the conclusion had already been agreed upon long ago. To them, it wasn't an insult. It was an assumption, one they had carried for years. They believed Filipinos were hardworking, yes. Friendly, yes. But strong? Capable? Able to resist pressure, challenge authority, or stand firm when tested? In their minds, no. And that belief didn't appear overnight. It was built slowly, through stereotypes, through history told from only one side, through moments where Filipinos were overlooked, underestimated, or spoken about instead of spoken to. But what the room didn't know, what no one there understood, was that those words had reached the wrong ears. Because sitting far from the spotlight, far from the microphones and applause, was someone who didn't react at all. No anger, no visible emotion, no outrage, just silence. A Filipino, not a general, not a politician, not someone powerful enough to interrupt, just someone listening. And sometimes, the most dangerous response to disrespect is silence. As the discussion continued, the comment was brushed aside. The speakers moved on. The cameras stopped rolling. But the damage was already done. Because those words didn't disappear. They traveled. They reached places no one expected. Quiet places, disciplined places, places where emotion is controlled and patience is learned early. Places where people don't argue back. They prepare. What makes this story unsettling isn't what was said. It's what followed. Because the response did not come immediately. There was no dramatic confrontation. No shouting match. No viral argument. Instead, there was time. Weeks passed. Then months. And during that time, something began to form. Quietly, deliberately, and completely outside the awareness of those who had laughed. You see, Filipinos don't respond the way people expect. They don't rush to prove themselves. They don't shout their strength. They don't announce what they're capable of. They wait. They observe. They endure. And when the moment finally comes, when action is required, they don't speak. They show. But at this point in the story, no one knew that yet. Not the officials. Not the analysts. Not the people who thought the conversation was already over. Because if they had known what would follow those words, if they had known what silence was building, they would never have said them. And the most chilling part? The moment everything changed didn't look dramatic at first. No alarms. No warnings. No headlines. Just a situation that seemed ordinary until it wasn't. And by the time anyone realized they were wrong about Filipinos, it was already too late to take the words back. His name was Miguel Alonzo. Not famous. Not powerful. Not the kind of name people expected to remember. Miguel sat quietly near the back of the room, hands folded, posture straight but relaxed. He listened as the discussion grew louder, more confident, more careless. The words being spoken weren't directed at him personally, but somehow they landed right on his chest. Someone laughed. Another voice followed, sharp and dismissive. A statement was made, casual, almost effortless, that Filipinos weren't built for real combat, that they lacked discipline, that they lacked grit, that when pressure arrived, they would fold. The room didn't erupt. It didn't argue. It didn't even react. Instead, there was something worse. Silence. Miguel didn't move. He didn't look up. But inside him, something shifted. Not anger. Not rage. Something deeper. He had heard versions of this his entire life. On foreign soil, in classrooms, even in quiet conversations people thought he couldn't understand. He remembered his grandfather's stories. Not dramatic ones. Not heroic speeches. Just quiet recollections of endurance. Long nights. Scarcity. Discipline learned the hard way. Strength that didn't announce itself. Miguel's jaw tightened slightly. Across the room, confidence grew. The statement was repeated, expanded, explained. Comparisons were made. Numbers were thrown around. Metrics. Rankings. Cold data stripped of context. Miguel knew something they didn't. He knew that Filipinos weren't loud about their strength. They didn't perform it for approval. They carried it silently, patiently, until it was needed. Still, he said nothing. Because reacting too early would give the moment away. And Miguel understood timing. He watched as assumptions stacked on top of each other, building a narrative so convincing that no one questioned it. The room nodded along. Pens scratched paper. Decisions were being shaped by confidence, not understanding. Miguel felt the familiar pressure in his chest, the same one he felt growing up when expectations were set low before he even spoke. The same pressure that once made him doubt himself. But not anymore. Because pressure had taught him something most people never learned. You don't reveal your strength when people expect it. You reveal it when they least see it coming. He inhaled slowly. Somewhere deep inside, a line was crossed. Not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. And although no one noticed it yet, the atmosphere had already changed. Because the silence in that room wasn't agreement. It was a mistake. Mateo Cruz doesn't speak when the words are said. He hears them clearly. Not shouted. Not dramatic. Just calm. Dismissive. Almost casual. A senior Chinese general stands before the room, hands folded behind his back, eyes scanning the mixed group of observers and participants. And then the sentence lands. Not loud. Not angry. But sharp enough to cut. Filipinos, he says, lack the discipline for real confrontation. They rely too much on emotion. Too much heart, not enough structure. They break under pressure. The room doesn't react. No gasps. No protests. Just silence. Mateo feels it in his chest, that familiar weight. He's felt it before. In classrooms. In interviews. In rooms where people decided who he was before he ever spoke. He keeps his face still. Calm. But inside, something tightens. Because this isn't just about him. He thinks of his grandfather, who taught him that silence can be louder than anger. Of his mother, who told him that being underestimated is a weapon if you know how to use it. Of every Filipino who learned early that survival means adaptation. Around him, others shift uncomfortably. Some avoid eye contact. Some glance at Mateo, as if expecting a reaction. He gives them none. The general continues, explaining hypothetical scenarios, controlled environments, simulations, stress response evaluations. He speaks with confidence, with certainty, like someone who has already decided the ending of the story. Mateo listens carefully, not to argue, not to react, to remember. Because every detail matters. The lighting in the room, the timing of the pauses, the assumptions hidden between words. This isn't just a statement. It's a test. And Mateo knows something most people don't. The most dangerous moment isn't when someone attacks you. It's when they think you're already defeated. He lowers his eyes slightly, not in submission, but in focus. Let them think what they want. Let them believe the story they've written. Because stories can change. And this one has only just begun. Miguel Alonso felt the shift before anyone said a word. The room hadn't changed. The people hadn't moved. But something invisible had settled into the air. Something heavy, something uncomfortable. The kind of silence that doesn't come from respect, but from doubt turning into unease. The statement had already been made. Not shouted. Not dramatic. Just cold. Casual. A senior Chinese military figure had laughed softly and said, almost dismissively, that Filipinos were not built for real combat. That they lacked discipline. That they relied too much on heart and not enough on structure. That in a real confrontation, they would break. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew who it was meant for. Miguel didn't react. He had learned a long time ago that reacting too fast gave power away. He sat still, his posture calm, his face unreadable. Inside, though, something stirred. Not anger, not pride, but a quiet memory of every time someone had looked past him, underestimated him, spoken about his people like they were a footnote in history. Around him, others shifted in their seats. Some avoided eye contact. Some smirked. A few nodded, as if the words confirmed something they already believed. Miguel looked down at his hands. Hands that had worked since he was young. Hands that had trained in silence. Hands that carried stories no outsider would ever understand. He thought of his grandfather, who never spoke loudly about the past, but always said one thing clearly. Strength is not what you show. It's what survives. The discussion moved on, but the damage was done. The doubt was now official. Miguel could feel eyes drifting toward him, not openly, not aggressively, but with curiosity mixed with skepticism, as if they were already waiting for proof that the statement was true. He remained calm, because he knew something they didn't. He knew that Filipinos were never loud about their strength. They didn't announce it. They didn't perform it. They carried it quietly, often unnoticed, until the moment came when silence itself became the weapon. And that moment was closer than anyone realized. Miguel lifted his head slightly, his expression unchanged. No defiance, no smile, just focus. If they believed Filipinos couldn't fight, if they believed heart was weakness, then letting them believe it a little longer might be the smartest move of all. The tension wasn't over. It had only just begun. The room changes the moment the words are translated. Not louder, not angrier, just heavier. Daniel Reyes doesn't move. But inside him, something tightens. The statement hangs in the air like smoke. A Chinese general, calm, confident, has just said that Filipino fighters lack discipline, endurance, and resolve. Not as an insult, not as a threat, as a conclusion. Some of the observers nod quietly. Others avoid eye contact. Daniel notices something small, but important. No one challenges the statement. No one laughs. No one defends the Filipinos. Silence. That silence does more damage than the words themselves. Daniel keeps his posture straight, hands steady, face unreadable, but his thoughts are loud. He remembers stories his grandfather told him about men with worn boots, limited equipment, and impossible odds. About standing ground not because victory was guaranteed, but because retreat was not an option. This isn't a battlefield, but the pressure feels familiar. The general continues speaking, measured, analytical. He talks about simulations, training philosophies, historical assumptions. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't need to. Confidence does the work for him. Daniel feels the tension building in his chest. Not anger. Focus. Around him, the atmosphere shifts. Analysts begin pulling data. Officers exchange glances. Someone whispers that the next phase will include controlled tactical evaluation. Not combat, not drills, but decision-making under stress. Limited time. Limited information. No second chances. Daniel realizes something important. This is how it starts. Not with gunfire. Not with shouting. But with judgment. He thinks of how often Filipinos are underestimated. Not loudly, but quietly. Reduced to footnotes. Spoken about, not spoken to. Measured by standards never designed for them. The general finishes his statement. Again, silence. Daniel exhales slowly. This isn't the moment to react. This is the moment to prepare. Because whatever comes next won't be about strength alone. It will be about composure, about restraint, about seeing what others miss. And Daniel understands something the room does not yet realize. The moment Filipinos are dismissed is usually the moment they begin to matter most. The next phase is announced. No explanation, no details, just one sentence. Those who remain will be evaluated under pressure. Daniel doesn't look at the general. He doesn't look at the observers. He looks forward. And for the first time, the silence doesn't feel empty. It feels dangerous. By the time Captain Miguel Alonso stepped into the briefing room, something had already changed. He could feel it. The air was heavier than before. Conversations stopped the moment he entered. Screens along the walls glowed with maps, symbols, and quiet warnings, but no one spoke. This wasn't the kind of silence that meant calm. It was the kind that meant people were holding their breath. Miguel took his seat slowly, keeping his expression neutral. Calm on the outside, alert on the inside. Across the room sat foreign observers, men with medals, rigid posture, unreadable faces. Among them was the Chinese general whose words had started everything. The same man who had laughed lightly, casually, when he said Filipinos lack the discipline to fight a modern conflict. Miguel hadn't responded then, not because he agreed, but because Filipinos were taught something different. You don't waste strength on noise. You save it for when it matters. The screen at the front flickered. A new scenario loaded. This wasn't a drill anymore. Not officially. The tone of the facilitators had shifted. Their voices were slower now, more careful. Whatever was coming next wasn't designed to embarrass anyone. It was designed to expose them. Miguel leaned back slightly, eyes steady. He didn't need to read every word on the screen to know what this meant. The moment the general spoke those words, the room had decided something. They wanted to see if the stereotype would collapse under pressure or survive it. Around Miguel, other participants adjusted in their seats. Some cracked their knuckles. Others whispered under their breath. A few stared at the screen like they were already overwhelmed. Miguel didn't move. His thoughts drifted, not to tactics, not to ego, but to memory, to his grandfather's stories, to quiet villages that endured storms, wars, occupations, and hunger, to a people who learned to adapt when resources were few and expectations were lower. Filipino strength had never been loud. It had always been patient. The facilitator cleared his throat. "This phase will test decision-making under uncertainty," he said. "There are no perfect answers, only consequences." Miguel's jaw tightened, just slightly. Uncertainty was familiar territory. What they didn't understand, what they never understood, was that Filipinos were raised in uncertainty, trained by life to think 3 steps ahead, to read people, to survive shifting ground. The Chinese general leaned forward now, eyes locked on the screen. He wasn't smiling anymore. Miguel noticed, not with satisfaction, but with focus. Because when confidence disappears from powerful people, something else usually replaces it. Fear. The screen finished loading. Timers appeared. Not loud, not dramatic, just numbers, quietly counting down. Miguel rested his hands on the table, breathing slow, controlled. He hadn't come here to prove anyone wrong. But if this room needed a lesson, he was ready to let the silence teach it. The room doesn't erupt after the statement. It goes quiet. Not the kind of silence that means agreement. The kind that means something dangerous has been said. Captain Miguel Santos doesn't react immediately. He stands still, posture straight, eyes forward. Inside, though, something tightens. Not anger, not fear. Something colder, something older. The kind of restraint learned over years of discipline, loss, and patience. Across the room, the Chinese general finishes his sentence slowly, deliberately. His tone isn't loud. It doesn't need to be. They follow orders well. He continues. But when pressure rises, they break. A few foreign officers exchange glances. Some shift uncomfortably. Others smirk. No one challenges the statement. Miguel feels every eye drift toward him. He has worn many uniforms in his life. Some were issued. Others were symbolic. Expectations, stereotypes, quiet assumptions. He learned early that reacting too fast gives people exactly what they expect. So he does nothing. The briefing moves on, but the atmosphere has changed. The joint exercise ahead is no longer just a drill. It's a test, unspoken, unofficial, and deeply personal. The scenario is introduced, a multi-phase tactical simulation. Limited resources, unpredictable variables, communication delays, command pressure. The kind of exercise designed not to reward strength, but to expose weakness. Miguel listens carefully. He notices things others don't. The way the terrain is described, the timing gaps in the scenario, the assumptions built into the rules. He says nothing. Later, outside the briefing room, one of the Allied officers approaches him quietly. "Don't take it personally," the man says, lowering his voice. He talks like that about a lot of people. Miguel nods politely. But inside, he thinks of his grandfather, stories whispered at night about resistance, survival, holding ground when retreat wasn't an option. He thinks of training in the rain, equipment older than the men using it, being told to make it work anyway. Filipinos don't break under pressure. They adapt. The exercise begins sooner than expected. Miguel is assigned a unit that no one else wants. Fewer personnel, older gear, minimal support. It's framed as random assignment, but the imbalance is obvious. Some officers glance at him with something close to pity. The first phase is simple on paper. Secure a position, maintain control, respond to simulated threats. But almost immediately, complications appear. Communication drops. Coordinates change. A supply delay is announced. Miguel doesn't complain. He doesn't request adjustments. Instead, he gathers his team and speaks calmly, clearly, without drama. "We don't rush," he tells them. "We observe. We move when it matters." As the minutes pass, tension builds. Other units push aggressively, trying to dominate early. They make noise. They move fast. They want to be seen. Miguel's unit stays quiet. Invisible. Observers watching from above begin to notice something strange. While others are reacting to the exercise, Miguel seems to be anticipating it. His unit avoids pressure points without being told they exist. They reposition before complications are announced. Someone in the observation room leans forward. "That wasn't in the briefing," one analyst mutters. On the ground, Miguel feels the weight of expectation pressing in again. He knows they're watching now, waiting for the mistake, waiting for the moment he proves the general right. But that moment doesn't come. Instead, the exercise grows more complex. Simulated threats multiply. Time compresses. Decisions must be made faster. Miguel finally gives an order that surprises everyone. Not aggressive, not defensive, something else. And for the first time since the comment was made, the silence in the room feels different. Uncertain. Uncomfortable. The Chinese general stops writing. He looks up at the screen and says nothing. The atmosphere changes. It's no longer casual talk or confident dismissals. The room feels heavier now, like everyone senses that something is slipping out of their control. The Chinese general stands straighter, arms crossed, eyes locked on the field display. What was once a smirk has disappeared. In its place is calculation. The exercise shifts. This phase isn't about raw strength. It's about decision-making under pressure. How fast a unit adapts when plans fail, when communication breaks, when terrain turns against you. The kind of scenario that exposes overconfidence. The Filipino unit is led quietly by Captain Mateo Alvarez. He doesn't shout. He doesn't posture. He watches. Every move he makes is deliberate. He adjusts positions subtly, anticipates changes before they happen, and responds without panic. Where others rely on rigid formations, Mateo relies on awareness. Observers begin to notice something unsettling. The Filipino side isn't reacting anymore. They're controlling the tempo. A senior analyst whispers, barely audible, "Why does it feel like they're always one step ahead?" The Chinese general narrows his eyes. He recognizes this pattern. It's not aggression. It's discipline. The scenario escalates. Limited resources. Conflicting signals. Time pressure increases. This is where most units crack, where mistakes compound. But Mateo doesn't rush. He pauses. That pause, just a few seconds, changes everything. Instead of forcing a response, he redirects. Instead of pushing forward, he repositions. Instead of chasing the obvious objective, he secures what others overlook. The room grows quiet. A European observer leans forward. "That's not textbook," he says. "But it's effective." Screens update. Metrics shift. The Filipino unit begins outperforming projections, not by brute execution, but by efficiency. Fewer wasted moves. Fewer errors. Cleaner coordination. Someone in the back mutters, "They're adapting faster than expected." The Chinese general says nothing, but his jaw tightens. Because now it's clear. This isn't luck. This isn't coincidence. This is training shaped by hardship. Decision-making forged in unpredictability. A mindset built around surviving uncertainty, not dominating through assumption. Captain Mateo Alvarez remains calm. Inside, he remembers the words drilled into him long before this moment. You don't win by being louder. You win by lasting longer. The scenario timer ticks down. The room is silent now. Not the awkward silence from before, but the heavy kind. The kind that only comes after certainty collapses. Moments earlier, the Chinese general had spoken with confidence. Calm, dismissive, certain that this would end the way it always did. That the Filipino officer standing before them would fold under pressure. But Captain Miguel Navarro doesn't speak. He doesn't celebrate. He doesn't react. He simply stands there, steady, composed, like someone who has been here before. The simulation ends. Numbers freeze on the screen. Timelines stop updating. And one result remains impossible to ignore. Every projection shows the same thing. Not just survival, not just resistance, but complete operational control. The analysts stare. One of them quietly rechecks the data. Another refreshes the system. Same result. Miguel's unit didn't win by force. They didn't overpower. They didn't rush. They outthought everyone. While others relied on overwhelming strength, Miguel adapted. While others followed doctrine, he read intent. While others assumed predictability, he exploited arrogance. The general's confidence fades, not into anger, but something worse. Respect. Because what Miguel demonstrated wasn't aggression. It was discipline. It was restraint. It was understanding the terrain, the people, the limits, and turning every weakness into leverage. This wasn't brute warfare. This was Filipino strategy, born from a history of resistance, sharpened by scarcity, refined by survival. The general finally speaks again. His voice is quieter now. "Where did you learn to think like this?" Miguel answers calmly. "From a country that never had the luxury of being careless." That's when it hits them. This wasn't a fluke. This wasn't luck. This wasn't one man. This was a mindset. A people shaped by storms, occupations, setbacks, and rebuilding. A people who learned that intelligence matters more than intimidation. That adaptability beats arrogance. That you don't need to be the loudest to be the most dangerous. The room remains silent, not because they have nothing to say, but because everything they believed just changed. Miguel steps back, not as a victor, but as proof. Proof that Filipinos don't need permission to be respected. Proof that underestimation is the most expensive mistake of all. Proof that when pushed, when tested, when dismissed, Filipinos are built different. If this story moved you, if you felt that pride rise quietly in your chest, like the video, subscribe. And remember this the next time someone doubts where strength really comes from. Because silence is sometimes the loudest admission of all.